Well, a monitoring group says U.S.-led coalition airstrikes in Syria have left at least 43 people dead. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says 17 children were among the victims. The UK-based group added that the attacks targeted al-Zawr countryside in eastern Syria. U.S.-led coalition carries out regular air raids in Syria under the pretext of targeting Daesh terrorists. However, there have been many reports of civilian casualties on the ground. The coalition has acknowledged direct responsibility for over 1,100 civilian deaths in Syria and Iraq since 2014. But rights groups say the number of civilian victims is much higher.
And now Syria says the U.S.-led coalition has used internationally banned weapons in a new air attack on the war-ravaged nation. U.S.-led warplanes dropped cluster bombs on residential neighborhoods in the eastern countryside of Dayr city. The attack killed a number of civilians and left some others injured. Bombing also caused heavy material damage. The U.S. claims attacks target Daesh terror group positions in Syria, but air raids have killed large numbers of civilians. U.S. has intervened in the Syria conflict without a UN mandate or permission from the Syrian government. And joining us out of Damascus is our own Press TV's Muhammad Ali. Hello, Muhammad. Thanks for joining us for this update. Muhammad, U.S.-led coalition airstrikes in the news almost every day recently. Why?
Exactly. The result is always the killing of civilians in large numbers. Now, what the U.S.-led coalition claims is that it is fighting Daesh, but when we look at the results on the ground, it doesn't seem so. Especially if you look at also the Syrian government officials' comments, especially when before the Russian Air Force started actually operating in Syria at the request of the Syrian government, when there was only the U.S.-led coalition operating under the pretext of fighting Daesh. The Syrian government officials at that time always said that the U.S.-led coalition is not actually striking Daesh at that time, and the capabilities of Daesh is growing, not being undermined. This is also something that the Syrian government continues to say, the officials, that the U.S. coalition is actually attacking everything in Syria and destroying everything except for Daesh. One of the main goals of the U.S. coalition, if we look at the statements of the Syrian government officials, we can understand that it seems like as if the U.S. coalition is aiming at destroying Syria's infrastructure and the country in general, because always the people's houses are targeted, the infrastructure, establishments in Syria, public establishments, and also private, also property over here. Their latest attacks, of course, in the past hours also left civilians killed in both towns of al-Sha'ti and Hajin, both about 110 kilometers to the southeast of Dayr al-Zawr. Locals over there continue to say that it is their houses that are being targeted, not Daesh on the ground. And also such attacks and strikes are causing the displacement of people. People are leaving, running away from their houses in nearby towns and villages, fearing of being killed by similar airstrikes, especially that in the past month, the U.S.-led coalition stepped up its attacks over there on that part of Syria, particularly on the eastern bank of the Euphrates River.
And before we let you go, a lot of our viewers might not know these internationally banned weapons. We've heard of them being used in Yemen, also in Syria by the U.S.-led coalition over there, by the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. What are cluster bombs for our viewers that are not familiar, Mohammed?
Yes, such bombs, in addition, not just cluster bombs, but also the internationally banned white phosphorus munitions, which were always used by the U.S. coalition in just about 10 days, were also used in the same town in Hajin. Such weapons cause the killing of people in a particular area in large numbers, and those are internationally banned. The people over there in Hajin, in al-Sha'ti, and in those nearby towns and villages have seen such weapons being actually dropped on their towns and villages over there, and they are the ones, those locals are the ones who are reporting actually and trying to tell the world that they are being killed by the U.S. coalition with such internationally banned weapons.
Crossing over to Tampa, Florida, joined by Scott Ricard, former American intelligence linguist and commentator. Thanks so much for being with us. Well, now they're talking about a monitoring group and talking about the number of airstrikes that the United States has carried out. And, of course, the latest one, 43 people dead, this time in Syria. Scott, we hear about this all the time, but it doesn't seem that anything gets taken care of, and Washington just continually continue doing what it's always doing. What has to happen to stop this in order for them? They're just basically going to other countries and doing at will what they want to do.
Well, to stop this, I think the first thing that needs to happen is people need to be made aware of the activities, and they need to get clear information. Unfortunately, the U.S. media and most Western media has been silent, not only about Syria, but certainly about Yemen as well. And these environments, the U.S. is setting records on the number of bombs that they're dropping per year now. They've never dropped more bombs in Afghanistan. Certainly, they're helping the Saudis drop bombs in Yemen. And obviously, the bombing campaign has picked up to support the group that the Americans are behind now. This specifically are the Syrian Kurdish YPG. This YPG group is the on-the-ground forces that the United States is providing direct air support, and obviously bombing campaigns have been horrendous. Just last week, over 2,000 bodies were discovered under the rubble of Raqqa from American bombing campaigns. So this is a horrific event in Syria. These bombing campaigns are not being done precisely. 2,000 individuals under rubble in Raqqa should be an example of that. Also, this last bombing campaign on Thursday, over 17 civilians were murdered. These were just refugees escaping other YPG battles in the region. So this is just only awareness and making it, of course, channels like Press TV, RT, and others trying to get out and making their footprint more visible in the global community. Obviously, the United States is unfortunately very hoodwinked by their news networks, and certainly overly entertained and misinformed.
Yet, and Scott, with this type of tragedy taking place pretty regularly, unfortunately, if we ask most Americans, perhaps they would say the two countries that the United States is involved in, perhaps they would say Afghanistan and Iraq. Not likely to say other countries. There seems to be a very big disconnect between what the American government is actually doing outside of the country, especially from a military perspective, and what the American people, the average American, thinks that they're doing. You talked about, you touched on the aspect as far as the media and basically being more and more in the entertainment industry than actually informing the populace. So my question to you would be, in this age of technology, is it that Americans do not see other news? Do they not care? Or simply they know, but it's not affecting them?
Well, unfortunately, it's not just an American phenomenon. This is a human characteristic. I actually equate humans to sometimes parakeets, unfortunately. What you listen to the most and what you see the most, unfortunately, is what you're going to repeat. And we have individuals across the United States and around the world that watch their respective news networks, and their commentary is typical of the channels or the stations in which they subscribe to. So those subscription sort of mentalities are really what drive the public opinion. So sadly, in order to break through that, and you're great lead into this, the technology is absolutely there to provide better information. Sadly, the habits and the desires of the human race is that we're actually, if we're accustomed to something, we feel more comfortable with that information. Information that is unfortunately not in line with the information that we're usually seeing sadly, we reject it as human beings. So it's absolutely a human nature phenomena, and it's been taken advantage of by leaders for centuries, sadly. Certainly in the modern media, if you look at the work of Edward Bernays and his book Propaganda, there were actual strategies set up that governments have been using for the past 100 years to use media to control their society. So it's just a terrible situation, and certainly the more work that we can do and the more time that we spend getting the word out, I think is potentially going to touch more people over time, unfortunately.
All right.